Good morning. Today, May 19th, 2024, we have the privilege of interviewing the survivor, Andrew J. Sabo. I am the interviewer, Jill Sharfstein. We are interviewing at Andrew's home in New York City, and the language of our interview is in English. Good morning, Andrew. It's wonderful to be with you today. Could you please introduce yourself?
My name is Andrew John Sabo. The last name is spelled S like Samuel, Z like zebra, A like apple, B like boy, O like orange.
And what was your name at birth?
Endre János Sabo.
Can you spell that for us, please?
EndreJanos, and the last name as before, S like Sam, Z like zebra, A like apple, B like boy, O like orange.
Did you have any other names?
No.
When were you born?
I was born on November 20, 1933.
And how old are you today?
90 and a half.
What was the name of the town you were born in?
I was born in Budapest, Hungary.
What were your maternal grandparents' names, if you know them?
Konig was the family name, and I do not remember their given names.
And what was their nationality?
The nationality was Hungarian, like mine.
Mm-hmm. And what languages did your maternal grandparents speak?
Hungarian.
What were they like?
Well, grandfather was a very thin man. When I knew him, he must have been around 60-ish. He had a fairly hefty white mustache, which was not a common habit of Jewish men. He conformed more to the Hungarian peasant customs.
Do you have any recollection of your maternal grandmother?
She was an old lady. I do remember that she wore her hair in a bun on the top of her head. I remember she had wrinkles on her face. I remember that she always wore black dresses, but I know very little about her.
And what was your mother's name?
My mother's name was Adele, Adel, Konig, Konig.
And where was she born?
She was born, I think, in Miskolc, Miskolc, which is a smaller town in Hungary towards the Russian-Ukrainian border.
Yes. And what year was your mother born?
Pardon?
Do you know what year that your mother was born?
Yes, she was born in 1907.
What kind of education did she have, if any?
Mother had high school education.
Mm-hmm. Did she have an occupation?
No, she was housewife.
And what is your strongest memory of your mother?
My strongest memory is number one, that she was beautiful. This was accepted by everybody. She had beautiful, natural blonde hair, and her complexion was faultless. She was originally lean. By the time my last recollection, she did accumulate a little excess weight around her girth. She was still a very beautiful woman.
Can you share your earliest memory of her?
My earliest memory of her is that I loved to snuggle up to her. I loved to inhale her smell. She always used a scent which was lavender, and it was a very clean smell. When I was young, she used to teach me letters, numbers, but later on, that was not practiced anymore.
Did she have any special food that she made for you?
She was an exceptionally good cook. And even though we had a live-in housekeeper and maid, who, by the way, learned everything from mother, she often went out to the kitchen to help and do cakes, chocolate cake, and special Hungarian cake called dobos, Dobos.
Did she sing to you or read you stories?
Not usually. The music was on my father's side. Father was a good pianist. In fact, he wanted to become a concert pianist, which his father, my grandfather, did not allow. In those days, that was not a respected occupation, and neither was it economically feasible. So father, like a good boy, bowed to his father's decision and gave up his concert career and became he worked with his father, my grandfather's establishment, which was an agricultural equipment and tool sales company.
Mm-hmm. And what was your paternal grandfather's name?
As I said, I don't remember his first name. I do remember the last name, Konig.
Right. And Koenig was the last name of your father's father?
No, that was mother's father.
So your
You asked for mother's father.
Okay, now let's ask about your father's parents. Who were your father's parents?
My father's parents were named last name Szabo, Szabo, and I do not remember their first names.
Right. And what
I never met them, by the way. They died before I was born.
I see. Now, what was your father's name?
Father's name was Ernő, which later he translated when he came to see me in Canada. He translated it to Ernest.
Good. And where was your father born?
Father was born in Újpest, which is a suburb of Pest, Budapest.
And do you know his birth date? When was your father born?
Yes. Father was born in 1890.
And do you know what type of education your father received?
Yes. Father went to high school and to something that would be equivalent to an English college, rather lowbrow institution.
And he worked in the store.
He worked, it was more than a store. They imported, father traveled to England, he spoke English. He lived for a year in Manchester and Liverpool, establishing business connections. It was partly export import, partly detail sales.
Thank you. What is your strongest memory of your father?
My strongest memory is, actually, I'll give you two things. Number one is his piano playing. Every evening, when I went to bed, I heard Chopin polonaises, ballads, etudes. He loved Chopin and played a lot of that. He also played some Schubert and Beethoven and Mozart, but mostly Chopin. And that was my lullaby, that I listened to the piano music of father. The second is that after the Shoah, father served both as father and mother. And he stood up to this challenge remarkably well. I didn't appreciate it at that time, but now I see it, how much tact and understanding he had and exercised with me. He allowed me to develop on my own way, and he never forced me into any direction, though he did give hints what is the right way and what is the wrong way. He was an exceptional human being that was recognized by his friends and his colleagues also, who often came to him for advice and discussions.
Let's talk a little bit about your parents. Do you know how they met?
I'm sorry?
Do you know how your mother and father met each other?
That is a long, long story. Let me start in the early years of the 20th century. The First World War broke out when father was on a business trip in Manchester, England. And he received his induction papers to the Kaiserliche und Königliche Army, the army of the king and emperor, while he was in Manchester. And his business partners suggested that he should just stay there and ignore the induction papers. Father had nothing like that. He felt that he had a responsibility towards his country. So he went back to Hungary, went for enlisting. He went taken to the Russian front. He was captured, and as a prisoner of war, he was taken to Siberia. He was near Irkutsk, the town Irkutsk in Siberia, where there were copper mines. But father was quite lucky because he played the piano. and playing the piano. He was exempted from working in the copper mine. He became the musical accompanist of the silent cinema. In those days, there were only silent movies, and he was the music for them. And it was his duty to select the appropriate piece of music that corresponded to the scene, what happened on the screen. And he played it. After about 6 years in this prisoner of camp, the camp was dissolved, and he walked up to Moscow, where he again used his musical talents, and he was accompanist to solo artists, and also taught piano lessons. After a year in Moscow, he went back to Hungary. In Hungary, he arrived as an old man. He lost 7 years. All his friends were married, had children, had family. He was there without any income, without any anybody to whom he would belong to. So he had an episode of depression from which he was able to emerge. And when he did so, he was looking for a mate. And he found mother, who was also at that time in a peculiar emotional situation, because the man whom she dated for several years suddenly decided to marry a much more wealthy girl than she was. So while she was in this emotional down, she met father, and they clicked off and got married.
Thank you for sharing that story. So now they marry. Do you remember what year that was, or do you know what year they married?
I think they married in 1931 or early 1932. I was born roughly a year after they got married.
Yes. Thank you. So tell us about your first years of your childhood, please.
Recollection of my first years of childhood is not firsthand, but secondhand. I have family photographs which showed me that I had a wet nurse. Mother didn't have too much milk, and it was customary in those days to hire a wet nurse. Bottled milk was not, mother's milk was not bottled in those days yet. So I have a couple of photographs of my wet nurse, whom I liked very much. But I have no recollection until my age 5. I do remember clearly my 5th birthday, when I decided that I was grown up enough to have attire that was only allowed for bigger boys. And I voiced it. And my father and mother were having a great time laughing around me.
And what was the attire that big boys wanted to
Uh,
wear?
it was knee socks. Up until that time, I was wearing stockings, which was customary for girls and for smaller boys. But being 5 years old, I felt that that's demeaning.
Thank you. And how did your family spend time together? Was it
Uh,
okay? Take a break.
you won't answer it.
Well, we're back from a break, and we want to hear more about your childhood, who lived in your building, how you spent time with your family.
Our building was a fairly large apartment building, 7 floors, and I think 7 apartments on each floor, and many of them had children. I was extremely lucky that among the children, there was one who was exactly my same age as I was. The Our acquaintance predates our birth because our very pregnant mothers saw each other in the lobby or the staircase of the apartment building, and they recognized that both of them are going to have children at the same time. And this is what happened. 2 boys were born 3 weeks apart, and both remained only child for their family. And therefore, we became sort of brothers for each other. And we went to the same elementary school, the same high school. We went to the same Boy Scout outfit. We went to the swimming pool together. In other words, we acted like brothers. We had our some of our summer vacations together. We even left Hungary illegally together, and ever since then, we keep in touch. George, the friend of mine, lives in Stanford, California. He was a professor and chairman of aeronautics and astronautics in Stanford. And we still talk at least every second day on the phone.
And his last name?
His last name is Springer, Springer.
So you both grew up together, maintained this long friendship. And what was your life with your parents as an only child? You were spend time with a lot of time with your family meals.
Well, before the Holocaust, mother and I usually spent our vacations in the summer together. Father worked and he visited us on weekends, but he did not come with us. And we spent some time in Matra, which is a hilly, small mountain in Hungary. Sometimes in the Balaton, which is a big lake in Hungary. And mother and I spent a lot of time together. Father only was with us in weekends, and when we were in Budapest, then of course in the evenings.
Yes.
In the evenings, father and mother had their own time. They had friends with whom father played cards. Mother kept company with the women, and so on.
Did your family celebrate Jewish holidays?
Yes, father insisted on observing Passover, Seder, and the major Jewish holidays. We were not religious. Uh, Mother did light a candle every Friday in front of her parents' pictures, but other than I went to the compulsory uh, Hebrew or Jewish religious classes in elementary school, uh, I had no great feelings about religion. In Hungary, actually, uh, uh, Jews were quite assimilated into the society. By that, I mean that many Jews, in addition to having Hanukkah, also had a Christmas tree. And I enjoyed getting presents for both Hanukkah and for Christmas.
So, as you grew and your childhood, when did you begin to hear inklings that your world was changing?
This is again a very long question, and I have to start at the beginning.
Please.
Anti-Semitism in Europe, in particular in Hungary, was ever since the beginning. The Hungarian kings had decrees that some towns, for instance, were not allowing Jews to enter. Other Hungarian kings accepted Jews, but did not allow them to own land. So a form of anti-Semitism was always present. That was the underlying nature. On the other hand, at least at the time when I lived between the two world wars, there was a friendly relationship between Jews and Gentiles. Though there was some preference of Jews mingling with Jews and Christians mingling with Christians, the rule was broken quite often. Sometimes even Jews married non-Jewish girls and vice versa. Father's motto in business and in life in general was a little German saying, Leben und Leben lassen. Translated, live and let others live too. And this was the way we lived.
Do you recall when you first felt or heard things were changing for the worse? Things were different?
Yes. the changes were gradual. And this was the tragedy, actually, that the changes were so gradual that people did not take them seriously. They were deluded by the fact that there were no pogroms like there were in Russia and in Poland. There were only restrictions in life, like Jews were not allowed to enter legal profession or city government and so on. Many people feel that Jews should have rebelled against the German and Nazi restrictions. This rebellion was effectively eliminated by the gradual onset of the restrictions. None of the restrictions were life-threatening in the beginning. Therefore, people did not feel that they have to stage an uprising. The major change came, of course, in March 1940. 41, 42, I don't recall exactly, when the Germans occupied Hungary. It was ostensibly only to have a military route towards Serbia, towards what was later called Yugoslavia. But in effect, Germans then remained embedded into the Hungarian structure.
Did your parents share what they saw happening? Did they try to protect you? Did they tell you?
Another very interesting question. Politics were not supposed to be shared with children. On the other hand, at 10, 11 years of age, I was prematurely grown up. I knew exactly what was going on. When father listened to the radio and they were talking about the purposeful restructuring of the front line, we knew that the Germans were beaten and they were running for their life. In other words, we learned to read between the lines, to hear the meaning of the words that were not actually said.
Did they have words that they used, but you knew what they meant? Any special words that you might remember? Or expressions?
To some extent, father and mother, if they wanted to have private conversation, used German. But this was meaningless because I learned German as a child, as second language.
When your father listened to the radio, did you listen with him?
Sometimes.
Did you ever hear Hitler speak?
Pardon?
Did you ever hear Hitler's voice on the radio?
not only heard his voice, I even saw him. Uh, Hitler made a tour of his vassal countries, among them Hungary, and the governess who I had at that time took me to see him, for which father was very angry later on. But she was actually right, saying that who would think that this blonde boy is anything but Aryan?
And who was the governess who took you? Do you recall her name?
Pardon?
Who took you? What was her name, the governess who took you to see him?
Her name was Margaret.
Margaret. And what did you think when you saw him?
To me, it was a bore. Cars going, people in it, crowds cheering. I had nothing to do with it.
When did you first feel your life as a child was changing?
With the Jewish laws that restricted Jews to their buildings and made the Jewish kids wear a yellow star on their clothes, that's when I realized that this is more than just game. This is very serious.
So, in your own apartment, what was happening? Were you staying in your apartment or what was changing?
Around 1944, buildings were designated those that were allowed to have Jewish occupants were assigned a big yellow star to be put out over the gate, over the door of the building. And these were called the Yellow Star buildings. Non-Jews were allowed to remain in their apartment, and some did. Others moved out. Still, Jews who had big apartments were forced to share them with other Jews whose building was not designated Yellow Star buildings. They had to move, and if you knew somebody or you had a relative who needed an apartment, then you shared with those. If you didn't, the police put in a stranger. This is what happened with us. A newspaper man whose name was Szigeti, Szigiti, and his wife were put into one of our rooms, and we shared with them the kitchen, the bathrooms, and they had one of the other rooms of the apartment.
And what was that like as these two families now had to share what was once?
Remarkably easy. We both were very tolerant, very easygoing people, and we had a common enemy. And therefore, there were very little hostile interactions that I could see. Not in our apartment. In other apartments, there may have been some.
Did your parents do anything to help avoid what was coming? Did they take any steps?
No. Father was a decorated soldier in First World War. He had a number of insignias that he wore on his chest when the occasion demanded. And he felt that his service to the country will exempt him from any detrimental regulation that the Nazis will bring. This belief was unfounded and wrong, but that's what he believed.
So, what happened next? Was there a more gradual change? Was there any sudden change?
The next step was rationing of food. And then the next step was the prohibiting Jews to leave the apartment building except a few hours in the morning. In effect, we were prisoners of our building.
Can you tell us what happened as time wore on?
We go up to the year 1944 when the German troops received a setback in Moscow and in St. Petersburg, which at that time was called Leningrad. And they were pushed back towards the Hungarian border. The then head of the state, Admiral Horthy, Horthy, made a desperate attempt to leave his ally Hitler and to align Hungary with the Axis power, with England, France, and the United States. On September 15, 1944, he made a proclamation in which he declared all laws that discriminated against Jews invalid and inhuman, and he applied to the powers that lined up against Germany to accept Hungary among their ranks. The Jews of Budapest were ecstatic. This was terrific for a few hours only, because after a few hours, the Nazis declared Horthy a traitor, put him into house arrest. They actually stormed the castle where Horthy had his home, and there was bloodshed with handguns and rifles. And within the same day, the rabidly Nazi leader of the Arrow Cross Party, Szálasi, Szálasi, took over the reign of the country. One of his first moves was to compel all Jews between, I believe, 16 and 60 to report to the sports stadiums where they were put in brigades. The brigades were taken to staging areas, and from there they were taken to Germany, or at least in Polish towns which were occupied by the Germans before.
And that was your father.
Pardon?
And that was your father part of that?
Well, no. Father was previously in a work battalion. He was in the age where Jews were called up as if military service, but without guns or without arms. But they had to work on defense establishments like digging traps for tanks and things like that. So father was there. Then eventually, father was released, and I'm not sure he was released because that unit dissolved or whether he was too old for it, and he was taken to the ghetto. The ghetto was a group of streets and buildings surrounded with a plank where Jews were concentrated, and where they had to live with pretty difficult circumstances. As for myself, when father was in the work brigade and mother had to report to a sports stadium for deportation, I was taken by my aunt, my father's sister, to live with them in another yellow star building. I lived with my aunt and with her husband for about 3 weeks when the Arrow Cross came to our building and made all of us march to a staging area, which was previously a brick factory. It had big buildings where bricks were formatted and dried, and that's where they housed hundreds and hundreds of Jews.
Do you remember the name of that place?
Pardon?
The name of that place? Do you recall the name of that brick factory where you were taken?
It was the Óbuda Brick Factory in Hungarian Téglagyár, where we went. We walked on foot, and it was no problem for me. But my uncle, my aunt's husband, had asthma and was overweight, and he had great difficulty in making that walk.
And what were their names?
Denes was the family name, Denes. The first name was Laszlo, was the man. And I don't remember
That's
the
okay.
name of
That's okay.
his wife.
Just remind me, how were they related to you?
The woman was my father's sister,
Father's sister.
younger sister.
And what did you have with you?
Her name was Alice.
Alice.
I'm sorry.
What did you have with you? You were able to take anything with you?
Yes. We were more or less prepared for this. And everybody had a little, either a rucksack or a suitcase prepared for the eventualities that will be taken also. So we had a little food in it, a change of underwear, things like that.
Did your parents tell you anything? You said you were prepared, and how
Well,
can you
the
tell us more
parents
about
were
how?
not there anymore. I was only with my uncle and aunt, and they were the ones who realized that we are going to eventually be taken, so they prepared me for it. In the brick factory, I had a tremendous luck. In the first morning there, I bumped into an elderly man who was the proprietor of the corner grocery store, Mr. Kemeny, Kemeny. And he looked at me, Janchi, where are your parents? He said, they were taken. I'm here with my uncle and aunt. And Mr. Kemeny asked, do you have money? And I did have. Father, before he was taken, made sure that mother sew into my overcoat in the lapel high denomination banknotes in case of emergency. And I told this man about it. And he said, well, this qualifies for such an emergency. So let's open it and let's see how much you have. And he did, and we took out the money. And he said, you have to trust me. I will not abscond with it, but I will see somebody whom I knew from before and who is now one of the soldiers guarding this establishment. And he did that, and money exchanged hands. And the soldier told me that when you are told to get in line. You make sure that you are at the end of the line. And when the line moves out of the gate and turns left, you turn right and just keep on walking. Keep on walking as if nothing happened. And I asked, what happens if they catch me? Then you said, oh, I missed the way I had to go. So this is what happened. The troop was assembled. They walked out of the gate. They turned left, and I turned right, and I walked back to Budapest the same way as I came, except I was alone and scared. I cannot describe the fear I had in a strange town, alone, 11 years old. I still had my yellow star on my chest, a bag in my hand, and a dish, an animal dish uh, uh, on it, in which I was supposed to get water or food whenever they were available. And I was walking towards Budapest. The curfew time was 12 noon. Jews were allowed on the street 10 to 12. 12 noon approached. I saw it because there was an electric clock on a pole in front of the entrance to Margaret Bridge. The bridge was one of the many bridges that connected Buda and Pest. It arched over the river Danube. So I was there with my yellow star, which, silly boy, I didn't dare to tear off. And the curfew time was coming. I saw a group of forced laborers digging ditches near the bridge. And I approached one of them. I told them that I'm here and time is up and I don't know what to do. He said, just come with me. And he took me to their group. And when they marched back to Pest, they put me in the middle of the troops so that it wasn't obvious from the outside that there is a little boy in between them. And we marched back to their station. And with their help, I found a place where to go. I couldn't go back to my own apartment because that was emptied. I couldn't go back to Alice Danish's apartment because that building was emptied of Jews. So I had to find another place. And they contacted a Protestant organization called the Good Shepherd, who was engaged in protecting and saving Jews. And they took me to a home of a Gentile man whose name was Shikloshi, Siklossy, and I stayed with them for a couple of days. Eventually, they felt that I was not a good thing to have with them because, number one, they had children, and number two, they were probably afraid that hiding a Jew is going to cost them their lives. So they made arrangement, and from there, I was taken to a Roman Catholic monastery in Pest. The Servite Fathers, Servita Fathers Church, which is in the middle of town. And I stayed there for about 3-4 weeks. But that's another segment of the story.
And there were other boys, the other Jewish boys there, as other Jewish boys were there as well.
Yes, there were about 30 boys there, most of them Jews, some of them not. Some of them were there to protect them from the approaching Russians. Some of them were there because they were Jews.
Then what happened after that?
There, it was an interesting communal life. We had big rooms where 20 or 30 Jewish kids were staying in single beds, but they are in a row. And we were having meals together at a big refectory table, observing strict hierarchy, that the older ones sat at the top of the table, and the younger ones at the bottom, and the meals were taken to the top first, and then they were handed down towards the younger ones. So I always got the worst part, the gristles and whatnot. But it was still an interesting place. They made us work. I remember I enjoyed tremendously to make kindle out of smaller logs with a hatchet. And when I got very proficient in that, they graduated me to the big axe to cut the logs into smaller pieces, which was very heavy work for an 11-year-old. They taught me how to put the veg into the tree and then hit the veg to split it further. And I enjoyed it. I enjoyed the smell of the tree. I enjoyed the sound as it split. And I enjoyed being proficient in a work. And we stacked the wood into one cellar on the wall, and that was my contribution. Another contribution of mine was helping to the fathers to dig a well, because they were smart enough to predict that water supply may be cut off, and it will be good to have an independent well. So the fathers were digging, and the kids were ferrying out the rubble that they shoveled off to the surface. After dinner, we went to bed, and one of the priests every night told us a bedtime story. And I remember that I later recognized one of the stories. It was Rider Haggard, Haggard, uh, uh, the author, and the title, the English title, is She, She. It's a romantic story that was later filmed also, and it was popular in the United States. Uh, it's also interesting that it had definitely pagan and even sexual uh, shades in the story, which the priest who told the story did not shy away from. It was an interesting thing. Maybe that was a way of sexual education. I don't know.
So then what happened? Did you stay there? Did things change for you?
Yes, we stayed there for about 3 weeks when apparently word got out that there are Jewish kids hidden in the Servita church. I never knew how the word got out, whether vendors who brought in food or uh, workers who helped in the kitchen uh, spread the word. But one day, a troop of Arrow Cross arrived, and they demanded that they investigate the boys who stayed there. Uh, as you probably know, uh, in those days, Gentile boys were not circumcised, only Jewish boys were. So investigation would have meant look at the genital organs and decide who is Jewish, who is not. Uh, one of the priests, his name was Father Lorinz, Lorincz, stood in the door of the clausura, outstretched hands like Christ on the cross. And he said, I remember, he said that you have to kill me first. And interestingly, the Nazis did not kill him. They went away. They were swearing, they were saying that we will come back, but they went away. But this was warning enough, so that head of the convent, called Pater Provincialis, Provincialis, said to us that kids, we can't guarantee your safety here. You are allowed to stay, but if you have a better accommodation, I advise you to call them up and make way there. So I called Gentile friends of my father. One of them, who I remember that always was invited to our Seder evenings, and he enjoyed being with us. And I remember that he said that if anything happens, I will take care of you. So I called him, and he didn't want us, didn't want me. But through him, I got in touch with a woman who was the governess of my cousin, who in turn got in touch with a former housekeeper of ours who had the courage of taking me. This was a woman who was a very young village girl when mother took her, and mother taught her cooking, and she became a formidable, really good cook. And she lived with us, and she was sort of part of the family, sort of, because she didn't eat with us. She served us at the table on Sundays, but and uh, but for instance, in my evening prayer, I included her name also. So we were more than employer and servant, and less than family members, somewhere in between. She met her husband at our house. Her husband was the mailman who brought mail to a building. And in those days, they actually delivered to the door. And this is how they met and fell in love and got married. And it was mother who gave a dowry to this woman, dowry of money and pillows and pillowcases and blankets and God knows what. Whatever dowry in those days meant, but she acted like a mother to her. So this woman came and picked me up and took me to her house. And that was about a day before Christmas. And she had two children, a boy about 4 or 5 and a daughter 2 years younger. And I lived with them. They had a 1-bedroom apartment, and I shared the bed with the family. And I remember the Christmas meal was bread with margarine. That was a festive meal because they didn't have anything much more than that. They had some dry legumes like lentils and dry beans and peas. And later, when the Russians surrounded Budapest and the siege of Budapest started, we went down to the cellar of their house and we took the supply of food and we lived there. They introduced me as a member of their family, a refugee from Transylvania, and they got even false papers for me, counterfeit papers, in which my name was Nagy, Nagy. And I stayed with them for about 5-6 weeks throughout the siege of Budapest. And the Russians came, and they came to the cellar. No, actually, first there were the Aerocross who came to the cellar, and they saw me, a fairly well-grown 11-year-old, and he said that you should be fighting against the Russians there. And my mentor or mentee, no, the mentor, uh, 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 Anna, said, but he's only a little boy. So they let me stay. Then the Russians came and they took my wristwatch. And the women were masked with coal dust and made very unappealing looking so that the Russians did not hurt them. And it was there that my uncle picked me up in January 1945 and took me to his place. So that was the story of the Holocaust from my view, my angle of view. Of course, being a prematurely mature kid, I knew what was going on because I heard father talking and other grown-ups talking. So I knew that there was a war. I knew that the Germans and the Italians and the Japanese were on one side, and the British and the French and the Americans on the other side. I knew what was going on. And of course, in the cellar, we heard the bombs, and we felt the shaking of the building when the bombs hit near. We heard the machine guns, and when the fighting got to the personal level on the street. So we were in the war. Food was scarce. There was one big stove that the families shared, and groups were formed who ate together and who cooked together and shared their food so that it would last longer. When the bombs or the fusillades killed a horse in front of the building, everybody ran out with knives to carve a piece of the horse for food. I went out too. But of course, the bigger ones, the adults and the bigger people were around the horse, so I could barely get to it. By the time I got near to the carcass, there was practically nothing on it. I still cut some lip of the horse off, and I very proudly brought into Anna, our maid and housekeeper, who of course got a bigger piece because her husband, a big man, got a nice bigger piece out of the horse, and she made stew out of it. Horse meat has a slightly sweeter taste than beef, and it needed more salt and more pepper, but it was a life-saving food, protein for us.
Should we take a little break for a minute? Okay.
Wow.
We're back from our break, and we're going to hear more from Dr. Sabo.
There is a little segment of the cellar life that I wanted to share with you, and that was that there were a few kids of my age or younger in the cellar. And as kids usually do, they went out to the bathroom together. I could never join them because I was afraid that being circumcised, they would recognize me as a Jew and my life would be endangered. There were people in the cellar who were anti-Semites, and they were swearing against the Jews and against the Russians, and they insinuated that the Jews and the Russians were associated against the German and the Hungarian Aryan population. And I just kept my mouth shut, and I sat and I let them talk, and I did not interfere because I knew that it's dangerous for me to get involved. When you're in these situations, you mature young. You develop defensive traits and sense what is permissible and what is not, far ahead than what kids who enjoy good life in America now do.
Can you tell us about when you were able to reunite with your own father?
I was with my uncle, my cousin, and my uncle's wife in the cellar of my uncle's store. Uncle had a large-scale business of the same kind as my grandfather ran, agricultural machinery and tool manufacturing equipment. And we stayed in the cellar there. And one day, a scrawny, very, very thin old man showed up. And that was my father, who lost about 50% of his weight. A black overcoat was hanging on him like a coat on a scarecrow. And he survived the forced labor camp and then the ghetto. And when the ghetto was liberated, he went to our friends, first to the gentleman who didn't take me in, and then to the maid, the housekeeper, who did.
Tell us her name so we have this on record.
Her name was Anna, A-N-N-A, Benke, B like boy, E like Eve, N like Nancy, K like Kathleen, O with two accents on it, pronounced Ö. And she showed remarkable courage and love, and I forever will be grateful to her. She risked not only her own life, but her own children also. Because had it been known that she is hiding Jews, she would have been executed on the spot.
And what was her husband's name, the postman?
I'm sorry?
What was her husband's name, the postman?
Name was Laszlo, L like Lillian, A like apple, S like Samuel, Z like zebra, O like orange. Was the first name, and Benke, B like boy, E-N-K-O with accent, the last name.
Do you remember the children's names?
The girl was Aniko, A-N-I-K-O, and the boy was Laci, L-A-C-I, nickname for Laszlo, as her father, his father was.
Thank you. So you were telling us that
we saw each other numerous times after the war. Father gave them a lot of money, and I visited them from the United States. I didn't have too much money at that time, but whatever I did, I gave her. The boy died young. He went to France and had a car accident and died there. The girl I visited last time, it was about 1999 or 1998 when I was in Budapest, and we talked about the old times. I think I need a drop of liquid.
is this yours? Yes. What, do you want some water?
No, thank you.
Okay. Should we start with the? So your father came back, and then did you reunited with your father?
We reunited with father, and father also stayed with us in his brother's cellar. And at that time, we realized that the building where we lived has been partly demolished. That was related to the fact that at the back of the building, there was an empty lot that was used by a paramilitary organization called Levente. L like Lillian, E like Eve, V like Victor, E like Eve, N like Nancy, T like Thomas, E like Eve, who hid explosives, grenades, and mines dug into the ground. And somehow this got ignited, either because of a bomb or because of self-ignition, we don't know. But a good part of our building completely collapsed. Many died there. The part of the building where our apartment was remained relatively intact. Relatively, I mean that all the lesser walls were blown out, all the windows were blown out, only the main construction elements that held up the building still remained intact. There were big gaps in the staircase, but we went up and we surveyed because we hoped to find some food there, which of course was completely emptied out. Each apartment had a little storage space for food, and mother was a good housewife. She always made preserves of fruits and vegetables and whatnot. There were rows and rows of these glass preserves, all gone. The only thing that remained there was a big metal vat in which mother, before she went to report to the sports stadium, put some bread to moisten because she wanted to make meatloaf. The bread was in the water in this dish, which was about a 25-gallon or 20-gallon size dish. And of course, as the windows and the walls were blown out, the winter cold froze the water solid. In it, these pieces of bread. Father and I took this whole thing, lugged it out, took it to his brother's cellar, melted it, fished out the bread, dried it on the stove, and we ate it. All our valuables were gone, but there were some furniture left, some rugs, father's piano, things that were too big to carry away. And father and his brother took heavy ropes and lowered it, the heavy furniture. I was down on the ground floor and untied it and took it away. And we brought a 4-wheel little trolley from the store, and we put these furniture pieces on there, and we took them to uncle's cellar. And later on, we restored some of them, and these were our furniture.
So, where did you live, and who were you living with next?
From uncle's cellar, my cousin and I, cousin is about the same age as I
What's
am,
his name?
Joe,
Joe.
were taken to a Red Cross establishment, which was housed in a suburb of Budapest named Fót. F like Frank, O like Orbit, T like Thomas. The building was the castle of a Hungarian nobility, Gróf Károly, K like Kathleen, A like Apple, R like Robert, O like Orbit, L like Lillian, Y like Y, and I like Irene. In this castle, there were Jews and not Jews, all kids who were starved or semi-starved during the siege of Budapest, and we were given reasonable food, which you would now think were very frugal, but nevertheless, they were 100 times better than what we were able to eat in the cellar. I remember that to get some greens into our meals, we kids were sent out to harvest nettles, which grew wild on the property, and using gloves, it did not wound our hands, but when cooked, they were like spinach.
And that was for the summer.
That was, we went there in January, and spring and summer came. They organized teaching classes for us, so I was able to take an exam at a high school, so I did not lose a year during the war.
And then after Fót, you went to, what did you do after that?
Well, first let me tell you about living in this establishment, this Red Cross unit in the Károly Castle, because it was an interesting experience. It was, we used the big ballrooms of the Károly Castle, where lines of beds were set up, and we stayed there. We had a big dining room. We found a cache of museal weaponry that the count ancestors used in the war, and we had plays performed where we used those swords and whatnot. There was a young Catholic priest who organized a Boy Scout troop. They were reasonably relaxed. For instance, they allowed me, when I said that I am very homesick for my father, they allowed me to walk a 7-kilometer distance from Fort to Budapest alone at age 11 to meet my father. And we stayed together a couple of days, then I went back because father didn't have food for me. Father, by that time, moved out of uncle's cellar and found an apartment, which was a one studio room apartment in a very beautiful part of the city overlooking the Danube. But it was still only one room. And there was a tea kitchenette, smaller than what you have here, where I had a cot and I stayed there, and father stayed in the living room, the only room of the apartment, which was partly occupied by his piano, which was a big piano, and a small room. The apartment was obtained through a friend and business acquaintance of father. Friend of my mother was the woman, and the man was my father's business acquaintance. And they helped us to get this apartment. See, after the war, when many of the buildings were destroyed, apartments in the city were very difficult to get. And we were very happy to get this, even though the space was not enough. The tea kitchenette, which was my room, was so small that if two people were present, then one had to be on the bed because there was only room for one more person in it. So after spending the summer out in Fort, I moved back to father, and I stayed with him in that apartment until the Hungarian Revolution, some 10 years later.
And during the time that you were living in the apartment, were you seeing anybody that you knew? What were you learning about your own mother?
The atmosphere in Budapest after the war was very interesting. People who were never friends, when they saw each other on the street, hugged and kissed each other and inquired, how did you survive the Holocaust? How did you survive the Nazi persecution? The word Holocaust was not coined yet. The life came back to the city and to the Jewish community. Tremendous speed. Rebuilding started almost immediately, and though the signs of the war are still visible now, if you go into the outskirts of the city, you still see in the wall imprints of fuselage and weapon marks. The buildings became livable rapidly, and life came back, and businesses started, and the political life restarted, and for a while it looked like that Hungary is going to be a multi-party coalition democracy, similar to many Western countries. This was, however, only on the surface, because the bottom line was that the occupying Soviet forces were still there in Budapest. They were less visible because they were housed in the barracks and in the military establishments, but they were there. And they had influence on the political life. They supported the Communist Party, which gradually took over, squeezed out the non-communist parties, the Social Democrats, the Smallholders Party, and other small parties. So eventually, by 1949, there was only one political party left, the Communist Party. So Hungary became a communist country, more or less a province of the Soviet Union. I got admitted to a fairly good high school called Berzsenyi, B like boy, E like Eve, R like Robert, Z like zebra, S like Samuel, E like Eve, N like Nancy, Y, I like Ilona, where, lo and behold, my old friend George from the previous building still was, and we again shared a bench. And it was a good school. And mother, who was taken to the concentration camp Ravensbrück never came back. She perished there. So father and I lived like two bachelors in that little room. And the school really acted more or less like a second parent. The teachers were excellent. They were not only professional but humane also. They saw excellence when they came upon it, and they saw hurt souls when they came upon it, and they treated everybody individually and very well. I can only say praise for it. So from then on, my mornings were in the school until about 2 or 3 p.m., at which time I went, and I usually ate lunch in a small, well, you can call it restaurant or diner, maybe diner. And then I went home and did homework. And then when I finished homework, then I went out to the street to play with other boys. The main game and entertainment and sport was football, which in English you would call soccer. And we played it everywhere, mostly on empty lots, and using makeshift equipment, non-regulation balls, but whatever, we kicked it and we played it. Another favorite occupation was making bonfires. There was a lot of unexploded fuselage left on the street. We collected them. We learned how to open them. You place the shot on the edge of the curb, and you step on it, it opens up, and you pull out the explosive, which looks like spaghetti. And we use that spaghetti to light our campfires and to play, because playing with fire is always exciting. And matter of fact, I had a fair assortment of this fuselage, which I stored in a shoebox under my bed until my father recognized it, and he was horrified and threw it out.
Tell us, if you will, about your studies and what led you to medicine.
Well, my first choice of profession was actually not medicine. It was music, opera singing. I loved opera. Father bought tickets for us to the opera and went regularly. And later on, even when we didn't have money for it, we sneaked in Sometimes we couldn't sneak in the beginning, but we always could sneak in for the second part of the performance. But eventually, even though I had a fairly pleasant voice, I realized that the voice is not big enough to sing in an opera house. And I had other interests also. And I got interested in medicine, in the biological sciences, mostly through books, mostly through book like Sinclair Lewis's Aerosmith or Paul de Cruyff's The Microbe Hunters. And so I decided I'd become a physician, which in those days became a very coveted profession. So much so that somebody like me, whose father at one point owned a store, and therefore I was considered to be an offspring of a capitalist, I did not have free entrance to university for medicine. Even though my high school graduation, which is called senior matriculation, was exemplary. I got a gold medal. Still, I was rejected from medical school. And then I realized that something has to be done. So I went to the Minister of Health and Education, where I was promptly kicked out. And I went back next day with a bunch of flowers to the secretary, who smiled at it, took my application form, and had it signed by the minister, associate minister. But that time, it was already 2 weeks into the new school year, and the medical school in Budapest was filled. And even if I had an okay from the Department of Health and Education and Health, they couldn't admit me. So I found some family connections to a university of Szeged, which is a smaller town in Budapest, in Hungary. And the connection was somewhat circuitous. My father's youngest brother, who was a physician, died during the siege of Budapest as a EMS physician. His car got bombed and he died. His widow remarried to a man whose uncle was the dean of the medical school in Szeged. So I took a deep breath and went to him and introduced myself, that Uncle Steve, I am Janci from the family. And he looked at me. "I've never seen you before. What family are you from?" And I explained it to him. And he liked the idea that I took the chutzpah to go with that to him. And he said, if you wanted to be a physician that much, then you should be. And he admitted me.
What was his name? Do you recall?
Stephen Polgar. P like Peter, O, L like Lillian, G like George, A like Apple, R like river. So I spent my first year in Szeged. It was a lonely existence in Szeged. I had to find new friends. I had to rent a room from a retired, actually a widow of a retired postal worker. And it was a tough life. I ate one meal a day at the university. I didn't have money enough to buy more. My scholastic average was so good that I was free of tuition and I got a bursary, but only enough for one meal, and that's what I had. The room was unheated with a stove that I could buy wood to heat it, but I didn't have money to buy it, so most of the winter it went unheated. Sometimes water actually froze into my glass in the room. I went to visit father at holidays, took the train, and found out that the wooden seats are not comfortable. But on the train, the luggage compartment, overhead luggage compartment, is long, and climbed up there and slept there. Now, after a year, things got a little easier. Stalin died in 1973. And the communist system got a little softer, so I could transfer from Szeged to Budapest. So then I could move back to my tea kitchen room in father's apartment. But by that time, I was sort of a grown-up. I was 19 years old. I had girlfriends. In the meantime, father also had girlfriends. So we worked out a system. We had Esslinger shades on the window. And if I come home and I see that the Esslinger shade is halfway up, I knew that I have to go to see a movie because father has an assignment in the room, and vice versa. When he came home and saw that the window shade is halfway up, then he went and went to see his friends or went to a movie, and so we never disturbed each other.
You ready to go on?
Pardon?
Ready to go on?
Yeah, sure.
Okay, good. So then your medical studies took you to?
Medical studies were interesting. The basic science departments were extremely strong in Hungary. Chemistry, inorganic, organic, and biochemistry, it was very strong. Anatomy, histology, bacteriology, very, very strong. When we got to clinical studies, which was in the third year, it was a letdown because clinical medicine, even though it was very high level in Hungary, it was taught very poorly. The groups were about 10 or 12 students around one instructor who went to the university hospital called the clinics, and the instructor put the stethoscope on the chest of the patient, and then the whole swarm of 10 students tried to put the stethoscope to the same spot. You could never learn medicine that way. Nevertheless, that was the education I received. That brings us to the Hungarian Revolution. As I said, Stalin died in 1973, and the communist system became much more relaxed. And relaxation in a totalitarian regime is a dangerous phenomenon because it encourages free thought, encourages people to discuss things, encourages people to criticize things. And so discussion groups were formed in the universities, discussion groups which did not fully accept the communist doctrines, but questioned it. And some supported it, some denied it, but there was a give and take. And eventually, a lot of these groups voiced dissatisfaction with the totalitarian system of communism. This was at a time when some relaxation in government was felt to be acceptable. And when some people suggested that Laszlo Reich, L-A-S-Z-O, and the last name is R-A-J-K, a communist who was an opponent of the prevailing head of the state, Mátyás Rákosi, M like Mary, A, T like Thomas, Y, A, S like Samuel, Rákosi like R, like Robert, A like Apple, K like Kathleen, O like Oscar, S like Samuel, I like Ilona, who was in a show trial that was totally fabricated and false, was condemned to death and executed. A couple of years later, these student uh, uh, discussion groups brought up that maybe he should be rehabilitated. I consider rehabilitation after death is an oxymoron. It's you can't make him undo his execution. Nevertheless, a celebration of his was planned at his grave, where a large number of students gathered. And in fact, I was invited also to be there and declined because I didn't realize that this was an anti-communist movement. I thought that this is going to be an organized celebration like the May 1st celebration of the Workers' Day and so on. So instead of going to this cemetery to celebrate Reich, I went to the home of one of my friends and we played poker. So we didn't even recognize what is happening in the other part of the town. That the crowd from the grave marched back to the city to the radio. They stormed the radio and occupied it. And the communists started to shoot at them. And they obtained, the students obtained weapons from the sympathizing soldiers. And so a total revolution broke out. And the revolution became victorious. And a complete democracy evolved, which, however, lasted only 2 weeks. During that time, they erased many of the communist laws. They forwarded a demand that the Soviet troops be withdrawn from Hungary, that the exploitation of Hungarian mineral wealth should stop, that free press should be allowed to exist. So this was then. There were some overshoots, like most movements of large groups. Not everybody behaved gentlemanlike, and there were atrocities. There were lynching of people whom they thought were collaborators with the Soviets. Sometimes they were really, truly Secret Service people. Sometimes maybe not. There were no court proceedings. They were hung up on the lamppost. So this was the revolution. The new parties came up, just like mushrooms after a rainy day. There was a Social Democratic Party, there was a Communist Party, there was a Christian Democratic Party, there was an Agrarian Party, and so on. In other words, a coalition was forming. Now, how did this happen? How did a handful of students overcome the regime? It happened because many of those who were in the armed forces were not there because they wanted to be there. They were there because they were forced to be there. And they were also against the regime. So they took the side of the students in the revolution. Another feature was that the Hungarian organized communists, as well as their protectors in Russia, were caught unaware and surprised. And they were slow to respond. However, at that time, a very unfortunate thing happened. Another major political eruption occurred, and that was the Suez War. 2 weeks into the Hungarian Revolution, Israeli troops occupied the fortress around the Suez Canal that was appropriated by Nasser, the Egyptian leader. Whether the Israeli troops acted on their own or were they CIA instigated, it will take probably another 100 years to find out. Whichever way, it was an event that took the spotlight off the Hungarian Revolution, took the Hungarian Revolution from front page of the newspaper to the 6th page of the newspaper, and put the Suez Canal issue on the front. That gave courage to the Russians to organize and to get their troops together, and with a tremendous force with tanks and armed carriers and guns and ammunition, they reoccupied Hungary, reoccupied Budapest, and sort of killed the revolution. During the revolution, I was a 5th-year medical student. The course is 6 years in Hungary. And I offered my help to a hospital where there were elderly physicians who didn't dare to get out to the street in this melee. So they needed physician manpower. And I offered my help, and I worked there, mostly civilian issues, though a few wounded came that way also. Anyway, I was working there when one of the doctors asked me, Janci, what are you doing here? I told him that I act like a doctor even though I am not. He said, that's not what I asked you. I asked you, what are you doing here? I said, I beg your pardon. What are you doing here in Budapest and why aren't you on the West? At that time, since the revolution, the border guards were withdrawn, the border equipment was dismantled, the mine fields were neutralized. So there was a large group of exodus of population who left Hungary. And he said, if I were you, I would go. So I took his advice, and with some help from father, and after discussions with my good friend George, we boarded a train and went to the border of Austria, where even the train personnel were on our side. For instance, they stopped the train in the middle of the field and yelled, anybody who wants to go to Austria, get off here because they are waiting for you in the station. The secret police is already waiting for would-be dissidents. So we got off. We crossed the border through a swamp, which called the Fertő swamp, Fertow, Ferto with double accent, swamp. Got to Austria, so left behind the communist system. And I think we should stop here for a minute.
Very good. Let's stop. We're back from our break, and we're going to hear about your medical school experience at McGill University.
I left Hungary as a fifth-year medical student without graduation, because the course in Hungary is a 6-year course. I arrived to Canada without a penny. Actually, this is not true, because the International Rescue Committee gave me $5. So I arrived with $5, and my uncle, who lived in Montreal, was less than pleased when I told him that I want to continue my medical studies. He said, how can you continue your medical studies? That costs thousands of dollars. You won't have money for that. I figured that something will happen, and something indeed did. I called up the medical school, asked for an appointment to see the dean, who was gracious to have an interview with me, which lasted an hour and a half. An hour and a half was enough to discuss medical studies, communism, war, the English medical journal Lancet, some aspects of medicine which may or may not have differed between Western and Eastern countries. But it included general cultural issues like Shakespeare's Othello and other aspects of life. And I was very proud of myself that 5 days or 7 days after arrival to a new country,
Bless
excuse me.
you. Bless you.
I was able to converse in English, which was my third language and not very well spoken, with the dean of the medical school for an hour and a half. However, at the end of the interview, he said, "Mr. Sabo, your story is impressive, but you have to learn English." And he suggested that I go to the YMCA language course. And his evaluation of my English was devastating because I really thought that I did well. To ease the impact of his judgment on my English, he said that, "Look, I can't admit you anyway because we are halfway in the course. So at best, I can admit you next year. I tell you, I'll give you a job, and if you do well, come back to see me in end of August, and I'll see what I can do." So I thanked his interest in my case, and I departed and went to an English course, which was totally useless for me. But I took the job that he offered, not only because it gave good money that I really did not earn, but also because it gave me exposure to the medical English language. And I was able to absorb a fair amount of medicine during my stay there. I worked in the Pathology Institute at McGill from January till end of August of 1957, at which time I got a letter from the dean saying that Molson Brewery, which is a Canadian beer factory, gave $500,000 to McGill for the use of Hungarian students. This happened because the owner's wife was a Hungarian lady. And I was beneficiary of this largesse. So I got admitted to the third year of McGill with free tuition and with a little money for my pocket. First, the third year, which was my first at McGill, was not easy. People talked fast, in a slang, which I could not follow. And I would have fallen behind had one of my classmates, a boy of Japanese extraction, whose name was Yash Taguchi, Y-A-S-H, the last name T like Thomas, A, G like George, U, C-H-I, had not helped me by showing me his notes, which were pedantic, elegant, factual, and helpful. With this, I managed to get by the first year, and the second year at McGill, which was the final year of the medical course, I was already in the upper third of the class, which is a fair jump from almost the last one to the top third. At McGill, teaching was very different from Budapest. Instead of an instructor surrounded by 12 students, we were one by one. In a cubicle, I was seated and the patient was taken in, and I spent an hour and a half or 2 hours with that patient, interviewing, examining the patient, writing case history, and then the instructor came in, reviewed my findings, re-examined the patient, pointed out my errors, and discussed with me how to proceed from here. It was a phenomenal experience. It was really as medicine should be taught. McGill was not only a good school, but it was also a school for us to get into the Canadian lifestyle. Canadian lifestyle is identical or almost identical to the American lifestyle, but it's very different from Hungarian and different from eating to clothing to dating to sexual morals and so on, which were all something that I had to learn and assume proficiency in. It was during my McGill year that actually before my McGill year, when I was in the language course, that a friend of mine with whom I went, I pointed out to him a woman and said how beautiful that girl's face is. Too bad she's fat as a pig. He asked, shall I introduce you? I said, no, I'm not interested in fat women. Next time I saw this woman, about 6 months later on a concert, when she was lean as a toothpick. And she was with a friend of mine as his girlfriend. the story was that she came to Canada and fell in love with ice cream, which in Hungary is completely different from the Canadian ice cream. It's not made with cream. In Hungary, it was made with water. It's more like a sorbet in Canada or in the United States. Anyway, Olga, that was the girl's name, consumed half a pint every day, and she ballooned up from it. When she was realizing that this way she cannot exist anymore, she stopped eating ice cream and she went back to her original weight. Anyway, that was when I got introduced to Olga. Next time, I went for a Royal College exam in Canada, and I stayed at a friend's home, a friend who at that time was vacationing elsewhere. And the phone rings, and the woman introduces herself, and that was Olga. And he said that my friend apologizes that he doesn't call himself, but he forgot the number. I said, that's funny. He forgot his own phone number. We laughed a good one at that, and we agreed to meet. Later, I married this girl. She became my wife, and we lived together for almost 50 years. She was brilliant, intelligent, unconventional. Her thinking was faster than mine. And there was never a dull moment with her. She died about 13 years ago with lung cancer. She was a heavy smoker. With that, she also said, I don't stop smoking because if smoking caused me cancer, it's already inside me. So there's no point in stopping. I live the way I like to live and I die the way I want to die. And she did. We had a son, Tom, who was a very good-looking kid. And when we came to New York, he went first to PS6, which is a good public school, and later on to a couple of elegant private schools. When he graduated, he went to Middlebury in Vermont, but then transferred to NYU again. And when graduating from NYU, instead of working in his field, actually, he worked for 1 year as a teacher, and then he decided he becomes a professional rock climber. And that's what he did for 10 years, against my objections, until he broke first one arm, then the other arm, then he had other injuries. So finally he decided that that's not the way to make a living, and became a caregiver in a halfway house for congenitally compromised kids, where he did such a fantastic job that the school psychologist suggested that he goes and further studies psychology, which he did, first in Michigan and then in Reno, Nevada. He obtained his doctorate, and he is now a PhD psychologist teaching computer courses on the air. So that's the story of my family. After Olga's death, I lived alone for a year when a friend of mine who lives still in Budapest called me up that there is a widow, a Hungarian widow in the neighborhood, whom I should look up because we are similar in interest and background. And I said, look, my wife just died a year ago. I am not ready for it yet. But eventually, we got together with Aggie, at least on the phone. Aggie called me, and I agreed to meet her in a restaurant. And she asked me, how will she recognize me? And I told her the truth. Look for a fat old man with bald head. That will be me. And she did, and that was about 12 years ago. We are together ever since.
Dr. Sabo, thank you for sharing your incredible memories and your resilience. We are very grateful. Do you have a message for those of us and the future generations that you could share with us?
My prediction, unfortunately, is not optimistic. I see that the world did not learn from previous mistakes. I see that wars are being fought with stronger and stronger equipment, and I predict that eventually the use of first tactical nuclear weapons and then later big nuclear weapons will probably annihilate life on Earth. Whether this is our problem now or later, I don't know. I think that an effort should be made to change ethics and attitudes so that instead of competition and fight, we should emphasize deal-making, friendship, and love. One of my friends said that, do you want to change the mentality of mankind? After all, we are animals, and the stronger lion will rule the pride, and this is something that you can't change. And I answer that perhaps we can change. If you put more emphasis on early education, education in the cradle, education in the toddler's age group, and put friendship and deal making ahead of fighting and competition, there is a chance to avoid this fate. If not, maybe the earth will be just like many, many other celestial bodies, completely devoid of life.
Thank you for sharing your wisdom and your heart and hope that someday we'll learn to get along. It's very important.
Thank you.
Thank you.
One.
Tell us, please, what we see in this picture.
This is the cover of my autobiography, Grass in the Storm, which was published in 2020. I chose the title because I was impressed that in a storm, grown-up trees are broken out or lose their footing and washed away, whereas grass only bends in the wind and straightens up after the storm is over. And I kind of thought that child survivors of the Holocaust, like I was, are like grass in the storm. We bend in the wind, but we straighten up afterwards.
Thank you so much. This is a picture from Grass in the Storm. Will you please tell us about it?
This is a photograph of my father in the uniform of a corporal of the Austro-Hungarian army. That was before he was captured and held as prisoner of war on the Russian front and taken to Siberia.
Thank you so much. And please tell us about this beautiful picture.
This is a photograph of my mother in her early 20s before she got married to my father.
Thank you so much. Please tell us about this photograph.
This is the last photograph of our family before the Holocaust. It may have been 1943 or 1942. Father and mother, and between them, I as a little boy.
Thank you. Can you please tell us about this photo?
These two people are the brave couple, Laszlo and Anna Benko, Benko, who saved my life during the wildest Nazi regime. They hid me with their family, risking the life of not only themselves, but their two children also.
Please tell us about these two photographs.
Photography has always been my hobby. And these two pictures were taken by me when I was a little more than 11 years old, maybe 12. On the left-hand side is a building in the street where our house stood, and this building is obviously cut in half by aerial bomb. On the right-hand side is Budapest famous chain bridge during the winter of 1946-47. And you see the chains hanging into the icy water. The quality of the picture is regrettably not the best, but that perhaps is explained that films after the war were hard to get by, and they were of an inferior quality, manufactured by the Perutz German company. And the camera that I used was a Kodak box camera, the most simple camera that can be purchased anywhere in the world.
Thank you so much. Please tell us about this photograph.
This picture was also taken by me with a slightly more advanced camera. That's a double reflex camera called Voigtlander Brillant. And in the center, you see George Springer, my best friend, who served as a quasi brother for me during my formative years, and with whom I still maintain close personal ties even now.
Thank you so much. Can you please tell us about this photograph?
This is the first page of the index, which is the most important document of universities in Hungary. It contains not only the picture of the student, but also the grades that he or she receives each year. And please note, at that time, I still had some hair.
Thank you so much. And these two beautiful photos?
Yeah, both photos show my wife, Olga. The left side was taken by a professional photographer. The right was taken by me. She was vivacious, intelligent, and unusually talented woman.
Thank you so much. Please tell us about these photos.
The Montreal General Hospital, shown on both of these pictures, was one of the two main teaching hospitals of McGill University. I had most of my studies, both undergraduate and graduate studies, in this hospital.
Thank you. Please tell us about this photograph.
This was my son, Tom, may have been 4 or 5 years old at that time, on a lake near Montreal.
Thank you. Please tell us about this photograph.
This fierce-looking Doberman was actually a very sweet, friendly dog whom I had to teach to bark because she didn't even bark when somebody rang the bell. Behind her is my wife, Olga.
Thank you so much. And please tell us about this picture as well.
In the middle, you see Aggie. On the left-hand side, the bald fellow is me. And on the right-hand side is George Springer, my lifelong friend.
Thank you so much. And this picture, please.
This is my son, Thomas George Szabo, PhD, about 7 years ago.
Thank you so much. Please tell us about this book.
This book is the work of my son, Tom, of whom I'm very proud, and I hope that it will be a fundamental reading material for further psychologists.
Thank you so much. Please tell us about this book.
This book was published in 1983, and it is edited by me and written by leading people in carbohydrate metabolism. There are chapters on anatomy, physiology, and clinical medicine, which I try to bring together in a single one-purpose volume.
Thank you so much. This concludes our interview with the survivor, Dr. Andrew Szabo. We thank you so much for your time, generosity, wisdom, and resilience.
I thank you, Jill, to give me forum to voice my views as well as register my past with the Shoah memorial.
Thank you.